Could a king reign for 36,000 years? Sounds absurd, doesn't it? What about 43,200 years? These figures don't come from a conspiracy site or fantasy tales. They are information written in Sumerian tablets, ancient Egyptian king lists, and Hindu sacred texts. Moreover, these records all say one thing: that human history did not begin the way today's narrow perspective tells us. There are two details in the texts that are very clear, yet equally startling. First, they explicitly describe the Great Flood, which is still dismissed as a myth today. But the second and truly shocking part is that they mention the first human king at the top of the list, the person religions call Adam. And then they describe how a being calling itself God or Lord ended this era of long-lived kings. And what happens next? Human lifespan suddenly shortens. If you think this is a mythological fairy tale, you are mistaken, because what I'm talking about are official, archaeological, and written documents. And at the end of the video, we will see together just how dark of a place things lead to. Welcome to Find the Truth. The year 1922 was a turning point in archaeological history. While Howard Carter's discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb shook the world, a team led by Herbert Weld Blundell in the ancient city of Lhasa, located in modern-day Iraq, made a much quieter discovery whose impact would span centuries. What they found was a vertical prism of baked clay, about 20 centimeters high, covered on 4 sides with cuneiform script. Today, exhibited at the Oxford Ashmolean Museum, this artifact is known in the academic world as the Weld Blundell Prism, and is the most complete surviving copy of the Sumerian king list. Many civilizations have such king lists. They are like a kind of state archive. However, the situation here is truly very different. The person who penned this approximately 4,000-year-old clay prism began the document with these words: "After kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu." This is a very important sentence that contains the entire essence of the matter. The expression "descending from heaven" is crucial because, according to the Sumerians, concepts of state management, law, and civilization are not human inventions. They are information belonging to an extraterrestrial, or according to them, divine origin. This is a truly interesting paradox. According to modern historians, the beginning of civilization is Sumer. Astronomy, mathematics, laws, infrastructure, and superstructure all appear suddenly in Sumer. But see, the very men who founded this civilization insistently and emphatically say, "We learned this information from the gods who came from the sky." Despite them writing in great detail that they taught us in this way, or even these events happened, and leaving us official documents as a legacy, and despite many other independent ancient civilizations advocating this same point, most of our historians still say, no, they didn't mean it that way. They exaggerated that mythology. Truly, this ego is of an inconceivable magnitude. You will understand better as I explain further. According to the Sumerians, the first city where kingship from heaven was established on earth was Holy Eridu. Its exact Sumerian equivalent is Nun-Ki, meaning place of the Holy Lord, the place where wisdom descended. And the founder and ruler of this city, according to the Sumerians, is Enki, who designed and scientifically created humans. Completing this chain of events perfectly, at the very top of the Sumerian king list, we encounter the king chosen as the first of the human species, the first carrier of knowledge, the Nabi, who learned the sacred knowledge from Enki, Alulim. This first human king in history, the name Alulim, is actually a detail that solves everything. If we translate the name Alulim into Turkish, its meaning appears as the first great human. In other words, he is the person called Prophet Adam in Islamic culture. I'm stepping in here. Alulim, Adam, Adapa. These are names that are very intertwined in history and are sometimes misunderstood in Islamic culture, contrary to what is in the Quran. That's why, if you haven't watched it, you should definitely watch my Adam video now and then continue here. You'll understand the subject much better. The link will be at the end of the description. According to the Sumerian king list, the first human king of history, the wise Alulim, who also appears as Adapa in some sources, reigned in the holy city of Eridu for exactly 28,800 years, and is the first of the 8 great kings before the flood. Let me give you a small piece of information. We see the name Alulim again in old Babylonian period tablets, and there he is described as being chosen by the gods to shepherd the people. Pay attention to this shepherd motif. You will see this motif used for many prophets throughout the history of all following religions. This is a completely symbolic narrative. It is a symbolism explaining that these wise kings, the Nabis, those called prophets today, were chosen to put the people on the right path. However, today, many narrow-minded people, having no historical records, have seriously understood the shepherd-prophet narrative as people who practice the profession of herding sheep and goats. This is just one small but beautiful example of how a deep meaning turned into such a worldly and shallow understanding over the ages. And you will see in a moment where things have led because of this simple thinking. In the era of human kingship that began with Alulim, the following names appear sequentially in the list. Alalngar in Eridu, 36,000 years. Enmenlu Ana in Bad Tibira, 43,200 years. Enmengalana, 28,800 years. And Dumuzid, 36,000 years. In Larak, Ensipadzidana, 28,800 years. In Sipar, Enmendurana, 21,000 years. And in the last city before the flood, Shurapak, Ubaratutu appears to have reigned for 18,600 years. It isn't easy to connect all these kings to the Alulim and Adam relationship, because unfortunately, the king list was found damaged after 4,000 years. However, I will make a video for you soon about the prophet Enoch. Not his book, I did that, but a video where we search for Enoch's traces directly. I'm just at the beginning, but the Enmendurana mentioned in this list has similarities with Prophet Enoch. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, as our journeys will continue to deepen. Let's get back to our topic. According to this list, the total reign of these 8 kings who ruled in 5 ancient cities before the flood is 241,200 years, and it describes our era when the Golden Age was experienced. Now, if there are those asking, what does the flood have to do with this now? Why did you include it? I didn't include it, let's not misunderstand. After the information about these 8 kings is given in the tablet, this sentence is written. Then the flood swept over the earth. The flood is not described at length in the Sumerian king list tablets because it was already described in sufficient detail in other records. For that reason, this official document begins its new section in this way. After the flood had swept over the earth, and the kingship had descended from heaven, the kingship was in Kish. Kish was one of the first cities after the flood, and although their lives had dramatically shortened compared to the pre-flood kings, it was still ruled by kings who lived very long lives, most lasting between 1,000 and 1,500 years. The list continues in this way for several generations after the flood in different cities with the era of Nabi kings, who were in contact with long-lived gods until the period of King Etana. Etana, who reigned for 1,500 years, was the last human king who had permission to ascend to heaven. And after his period, whatever happened, the communication between the gods and the human kings they guided was completely severed. Some researchers claim this was due to a different flood we don't know about, while others claim the famous Tower of Babel event happened after this time, and humans were punished and left to their own devices. And the Tower of Babel event actually makes sense, because after Etana, the reigns of the kings suddenly dropped to 100-odd years, and later to more human levels, like 50, 60, 10, 20. This break is actually one of the dark points I mentioned at the beginning of the video. I also recommend watching the Tower of Babel video, as I handle the subject in detail there. But if I need to connect it here again, in the Torah, humanity, still speaking a single language and having a unitary structure, wants to ascend to the heavens and be like God. Seeing this, the Lord God becomes afraid, and with the concern that, if we don't stop them, they will be like us, he has his angels destroy the tower. And somehow, both our languages get mixed up. And as stated in this verse, the Lord said, "My spirit will not struggle with man forever, for he is also flesh. The days of humans will be 120 years. They shorten our lives all at once. Some researchers, as I said, think the sudden dramatic drops in reign lengths in the Sumerian king list might be related to this event. And look, while the origin of the story has been telling of humans and alien gods, the Anunnaki, since the beginning, the Torah is a book that presents these men to us as the Lord God and the sons of God. This is why I told you to read the Torah if you are curious about these subjects. But here the trouble begins. Surely we sent down the Torah. In it is guidance and light. The prophets who had submitted to Allah judged by it for the Jews, as did the godly people and the scholars, because they were entrusted with the protection of Allah's book. They were witnesses that the Torah was the truth. So do not fear people, fear me, and do not exchange my verses for a small price." those who do not judge by what Allah has sent down are the disbelievers. Say, O people of the book, you follow no path unless you properly implement the Torah, the Gospel, and what has been sent down to you from your Lord, the Quran. Now, these verses are verses that came about 1 to 2 years before the conquest of Mecca. In other words, they are more current verses that came years after the verses where some claim the Quran says the Torah was changed. In those verses presented as changed, there is a narrative about how they distorted words. That is, it doesn't say the Torah completely changed. The Quran kind of curses those who mislead people according to their own whims. In fact, as you just saw, the Quran says the opposite. Apply the Torah, the Gospel, and the Quran. But here the following problem arises. There are such verses in the Torah which is said to be applied, or else your path is not a path. To the Israelites, I have known only you among all the peoples on the earth. In the cities that the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance, you shall not leave any living thing alive. You shall completely destroy them. Let me give a small footnote here. The place he mentions is the place known in history as the land of Canaan. And it is known that the place was used as a settlement by the Ablates even before the Israelites. So in this story, the invading force is actually the Israelites, as far as we understand, thousands of years ago, just like today. But you read the command the Torah gave them earlier. For you are a holy people to the Lord your God. The Lord has chosen you to be his special people among all the peoples on the earth. However, you shall take for yourselves the women, children, animals, and everything in the cities, all the plunder. You shall eat the plunder of your enemies. The Lord your God has given them to you. These are a few examples. You would be shocked if you saw the ones about women and the cruel attitude toward people. Now, should Muslims take these commands in the Torah seriously and establish good relations with Israel, according to the verses in Surah Al-Ma'idah, should they support them in these aggressive expansion policies? If anyone can find a way out of this, please write in the comments, because I couldn't. Anyway, let's continue with our topic. I don't want to get into these points on the channel anymore because it doesn't lead to a result and frankly doesn't interest me anymore. While states that consider themselves the vanguard of Islam are so indifferent to what is happening, and while many countries from Egypt to the United Arab Emirates, from Jordan to Bahrain, continue trade with Israel instead of taking a stand, the discussion we are having here has no meaning anyway. Trade data explains very well what comes before what. The narrative that the Nabi kings of the past in the king list lived long lives finds a place for itself once again in the books of the Abrahamic religions. According to the Torah, the ancestors who lived before the flood, the antediluvian patriarchs listed from Adam to Noah, have extraordinarily long lives of 800 to 900 years. Adam lived 930 years. Jared from his lineage lived 962 years. Methuselah, the last generation before the flood, was recorded as the longest living person at exactly 969 years. There are a total of 10 generations in this list up to Noah. Considering that some versions of the pre-flood part of the Sumerian king list also mention 8 to 10 kings, we get the impression that two different traditions were shaped around similar motifs. In the Quran, it similarly appears that Prophet Noah lived with his people for 950 years, but we can't see more detail. The Quran doesn't touch on the pre-flood era much, but it mentions developed and destroyed lands or societies after the flood, like the city of Iram and the tribes of Ad and Thamud. However, what will truly strengthen our research are the records of great civilizations other than the Sumerians, and they are not far behind the Sumerians. In fact, you will see in a moment that Egyptian records take the matter to a completely different place, to the sunken continent of Atlantis. While clay tablets in Mesopotamia recorded the kingship descending from the sky, papyri and temple walls in the Nile Valley were telling of a mysterious era called Zep Tepi, meaning the first time. The official history of Egypt is usually started with the first dynasty and King Menes, or Nama as he is otherwise known, in the 31st century BC. However, the Egyptians' own records insistently emphasize that this date was not a beginning, but a re-establishment. The most valuable and controversial document of ancient Egyptian chronology is the Turin King Papyrus, preserved today at the Museo Egizio in Turin, Italy. Dating to the reign of Ramses II about 3,300 years ago, this document, unlike other pharaoh lists in Abydos and Karnak, does not apply political censorship. It describes in detail kings who were tried to be erased from history, the invading Hyksos, and most importantly, the mythological rulers before Menes. The greatest misfortune of the papyrus is that it was shattered into pieces while being moved to the museum in the 19th century. However, thanks to reconstructions, shocking details of the beginning part of the document have emerged. The papyrus divides Egyptian history into three main periods. The period of gods, when gods like Ptah, Ra, Shu, Geb, Osiris, Set, and Horus personally and physically ruled Egypt. Afterwards, the period of beings called Shemsu-Hor, meaning followers of Horus, who were semi-gods or spirits coming after the gods. And finally, the period of human kings, the era of mortal pharaohs starting with Menes. According to the Turin Papyrus, the total reign of these divine and semi-divine beings before Menes reaches 13,420 years. This figure is also consistent with the figures given by the Egyptian historian Manetho in his work Egyptiaca. Manetho recorded even the reign lengths, stating that the gods and semi-gods before and after the flood reigned for a total of 36,525 years. And what a coincidence! Just like in the Sumerian list, we see that lifespans decrease here too. For example, Ptah reigned 9,000 years, Helios, Ra, 992 years, Shu, 700 years, Geb, 500 years, Osiris, 433 years. The most mysterious group in the Turin list is undoubtedly the Shemsu-Hor. This group, whose name means followers of Horus, is portrayed as a bridge dynasty providing the transition between gods and human pharaohs. Academic Egyptology tends to interpret the Shemsu-Hor as tribal chiefs in the pre-dynastic period or as an elite warrior class that established a united Egypt. However, alternative history researchers like Schwaller de Lubitsch and Robert Bauval argue that this group consists of remnants of an advanced civilization that survived the flood and carried the architectural, astronomical, and mathematical knowledge of Zep-Tepi to dynastic Egypt. They claim the Egyptians, like the Sumerians, deified the advanced pre-flood civilizations because they couldn't understand them. This error of humanity becoming ignorant is encountered in almost all cultures. In my opinion, this is the reason even polytheistic religions were born. The engineering knowledge used in the construction of the pyramids and the Sphinx on the Giza Plateau, which is difficult to explain even today, was not an invention of the Egyptians according to them, but a legacy inherited from ancestors through the Shemsu-Hor. Expressions like the Plan of the Great Ones or the Books of Thoth, which frequently appear in Egyptian temples, refer to this ancient transfer of knowledge. In fact, in the Hawara Labyrinth video I made last week, I mentioned the incredible structure where this group kept the ancient knowledge brought from the sunken Egg Island, known as Atlantis to the Greeks, and Mu, or Lemuria, to the Hindus, which was destroyed by the flood. Well, our topic has come back to that point. Actually, the most striking evidence that Zep-Tepi was not just a creation myth, but also a tangible record of historical catastrophe is inscribed on the walls of the Temple of Edfu in Upper Egypt. These inscriptions, known as the Edfu building texts, date the temple's origin back to Zep-Tepi and speak of a lost homeland called Egg Island, or the First Island. According to the texts, there was initially a sacred island surrounded by reeds and waters where divine beings lived. A force called the Serpent, or the Enemy, attacked the island. As a result of this attack or event, the island was destroyed, submerged in water, and plunged into darkness. The text described the island's end coming with a terrible sound or explosion, and that even the creator, Adam, was horrified by this destruction he himself had created. I want to step in here. In my Quran video, I mentioned verses describing how angels destroyed a tribe with a sound coming from the heavens. Well, we've established another interesting relationship, and you'll see its Sumerian roots in a moment. A group of wise beings who survived the disaster, known as the Sheptu or Creators, scattered to various parts of the world, determining the locations of future temples and restarting civilization. The Edfu narrative structurally overlaps exactly with Plato's Atlantis story and Sumerian flood myths, and these texts are sources that strongly suggest Zep-Tepi was a real historical period that ended with a massive disaster like an asteroid impact or a flood, and that Egyptian civilization was founded by refugees from this sunken island. Is it over? Of course not. Let's delve even deeper into more striking texts together. When we combine the Sumerian, Egyptian, and Hindu records, we find not a single civilization, but pieces of a globally connected master culture with advanced knowledge that perished simultaneously. All three civilizations base their history on a divine beginning, interrupted with a great water disaster, and describe how humans rebuilt civilization in the subsequent Silver Age. However, interestingly, even after the flood, catastrophic level disasters do not end. And this time, this rebuilding process is under threat from evil winds and celestial fires. In Sumerian literature, another type of destruction that took place thousands of years after the flood is described. Around 2000 BC, the event that brought the end of the city of Ur and the Sumerian civilization was not just the invasion of the Elamites. The lament for Ur and lament for Sumer and Ur tablets speak of a force far more terrifying than enemy soldiers, a phenomenon called the evil wind. And interestingly, the words chosen in this narrative and the description of events will evoke a scene from today: a nuclear bomb. The lament describes the event to us in this way: a storm that covered the land, a wind that turned cities into ghost towns, a heat that scorched in the middle of the sun, making no shadow, something that cut people's breath, filling their mouths with blood. There was no hunger in the city, but people were melting away. They collapsed in their homes. The water of the rivers turned bitter. The grass in the fields withered. Alternative historian Zechariah Sitchin and his followers interpreted these texts and the Era epic as evidence of a nuclear war between Anunnaki clans, specifically Ninurta and Marduk. In the Era epic, it is described how the god Era used 7 terrible weapons to end Marduk's sovereignty. These weapons are clearly described as terrifying and forbidden forces that toppled mountains, boiled seas, set heavens on fire, and vaporized people. After these weapons, the destruction is of such abnormal magnitude that the great cities of the time, Babylon, Sipar, Uruk, Der, are leveled, and countless people die. In fact, after this massacre he caused, Era prays for the recovery of the people who had almost reached the limit of extinction. Such a great destruction is spoken of. Now, of course, these are a bit more of the mythological side of things. However, one must not forget, we keep discovering that various cities and events that academia previously called mythology are actually real thanks to modern archaeology. So always remember that there could be a share of reality behind these subjects, especially if such a massive event is described in the same way in various parts of the world. For example, another finding that supports the theory of the clash of gods reminiscent of nuclear war is the high radiation skeletons allegedly found in the city of Mohenjo-Daro in Pakistan and the Libyan desert glass event found in the desert on the Egypt-Libya border. Today, most academics attribute the Libyan glass to a meteor explosion and Mohenjo-Daro to normal abandonment. However, the descriptions of invisible death and toxic clouds in Sumerian texts, the disaster brought by the horned serpent in Egyptian narratives, and the descriptions of sacred weapons reminiscent of nuclear bombs used by gods during the Mahabharata, the Great War, in Hindu texts, tell us independently that the ancient world perhaps underwent a serious slaughter either with technological devices like in the myths or following a cosmic event. Now here are the points where I need to make notes again. Yes, from religions to all ancient civilizations and cultures on the planet, the Great Flood narrative exists in all of them. And its geographical evidence overlaps very clearly with the period of great glacial melting between 10,000 and 10,500 BC, that is, the Younger Dryas. This is now a scientific fact. However, do the narratives of cities destroyed by sounds from the sky, people destroyed by toxic fumes, and the war of the gods describe pre-flood eras? Or do they describe the period immediately after the flood? We can't prove that as clearly as the flood. I mean, these events might have happened before the flood we know, and were later incorporated into myths. Also, never forget, Earth is a planet that moves cyclically. I mean, similar events happened many times before the event we call the last flood. And besides these, events occurred cosmically and as different climatic events. So when researching, don't just say, there was only one Noah's flood and move on. For example, the Great Freeze event mentioned in Hindu, Zoroastrian, and Hopi texts is thought to have occurred about 1,000 years before the flood we know. And look, another myth settles on a scientifically real ground. Briefly, looking at these as fabricated stories or myths is the work of people with horse blinders. But it would also be wrong to approach everything written as a correct chronology. For that reason, definitely try to establish these connections with cross-examinations. People who lived for thousands of years, sunken giant islands, nuclear wars. Truly, if a movie were made, it would be a blockbuster. But can these be real? Do these narratives have scientific basis? Can humans really live for hundreds of years? All these questions actually have a very simple and single answer. Yes. And we also know how to do it. To underestimate the Sumerians and those who, like them, say those who came from the sky taught us these things. That is the foundations of civilization, and to say the ancients just exaggerated without knowing is nothing but ignorance. Almost everything we use today, time, the calendar, basic astronomy, the calculation of the week and the month, was discovered by the Sumerians. Or as they put it, this information was taught to them. So if these men, and other advanced ones like them, repeatedly write in their official documents that this happened this way, I think we should pay some attention. This includes the long life event. Now, the narrative of people who lived for hundreds or even thousands of years mentioned in Egyptian, Hindu, and Sumerian documents is nonsense to academia. But frankly, as a person who has lost all faith in mainstream academia, I am on the side of science and academia that looks at things from a broader angle, not the types who get the title of professor with money and have ego trips. This open-minded approach tells us that this possibility is actually a reality, not a myth. And in fact, millions of dollars are being spent now for its rediscovery. The key word here is telomeres. Modern biology has thoroughly discovered in recent years that one of the most important indicators of aging at the cellular level is telomeres. Telomeres, located at the ends of our chromosomes and resembling the plastic protectors at the end of a shoelace, shorten a bit with each cell division. And when telomeres reach a critical shortness, this is called the Hayflick limit, the cell stops dividing and dies or ages. So theoretically, if we slow down telomere loss, life also begins to extend. Of course, telomeres are not the only factor, but with genetic studies like this, these long lives can be reached. With this approach, it could theoretically be possible for pre-flood people or kings to have a genetic structure where the telomerase enzyme worked much more actively and telomeres did not shorten or shortened very slowly. Variations of longevity genes like FOXO3 in those periods might have made cellular repair perfect. It might also have happened that humanity, which decreased with the flood and the destruction experienced, had a genetic bottleneck while repopulating. And for this reason, these genes began to deteriorate. These are all claims that rest on scientific ground. And if we really lived with beings that had the genetic knowledge to even design us back in the day, as dozens of ancient civilizations say, such genetic manipulations would not be difficult for those guys. We have almost become able to do these ourselves today. The narrative of sunken islands is a completely scientific subject. In fact, these giant landmasses have even begun to be discovered. For example, this area you see on the map right now is the sea between Thailand, Cambodia, and Indonesia. However, this was the region known as Sundaland in the periods before the flood. And there was no sea here. In fact, according to some claims, Asia and Australia were connected to each other by this piece of land. What a coincidence. Exactly in the Younger Dryas period, this place goes underwater, and Australia turns into a giant island piece. There you have it, the origin of the flood story told in Asia and Australia. I mean, you look at the myths of the Aborigines who have lived on the continent for 65,000 years. They describe how the place called the Great Barrier Reef today went underwater after the Younger Dryas period. They describe how the land connection of Australia, New Guinea, and Tasmania was severed. Patrick Nunn and Nick Reed spoke with these tribes about these myths for years and found that they really coincide with the years known as Noah's flood. But behold, only through satellite images did those stony heads become able to accept this. Before that, they were saying, no, these are myths. Once LiDAR and underwater mapping develop a bit more, who knows what will be found? To wrap up, ancient Sumerian, Egyptian, and Hindu traditions insistently whisper the same thing to us. Formerly, the world was different. We lived in the shadow of celestial beings. Then a great break came and everything changed. Some texts describe this as gods, some as semi-gods, some as wise ones. And in religious texts written much later than these, they are described as angels. The names change, but the backbone remains the same. Humanity experienced a threshold of disaster, then knowledge was taught again, order was re-established, and we arrived at these days. And even if these hundreds of narratives use the word flood, they also transmit the same trauma to us with different details by mentioning the harsh change of climate, land sinking into water, celestial events, migrations, and the collapse of the old order. Today, every new tablet, Every excavation site, every dating study reminds us of this. What we call myth might sometimes not be a fabrication, but a piece of memory that comes broken through time. Moreover, this is not just Mesopotamia's issue. The similar rhythm between the Abrahamic tradition's narratives of pre-flood long lives and destroyed tribes, and Mesopotamia's pre-flood kings and the war of the gods, does much more than just ignite the origin debate. It shows us how incomplete it can be to read humanity's past by squeezing it into a single line. Because in most of these texts, time is not described as a straight line, but as a cycle. Rise, peak, collapse, rebirth, and again. Right here, a critical question emerges. If old societies recorded these destruction cycles like a warning, what are we ignoring today? The fake civilization that the West marketed to us by taking it from the East is fabricating a linear story that says history walked like this and will continue like this. And we make the mistake of believing these imperialist mentalities, who even change history for their own interests, thinking they are civilized. How bitter. I will tell you examples of this in the coming days, but fortunately, I see that my followers have come out of this genre. I'm aware that you are doing this questioning because I can see the channels you watch besides mine. That's why I will continue these series. Because look, we started with the Sumerian king list, and a tiny prism suddenly took us to doors opening to the depths of time and showed how rich the depth of past history is compared to the shallow frame presented to us. From now on, we will open each of these doors one by one. Separate videos will come for pre-flood era narratives, Zep-Tepi, wise kings, the common backbones of religions, and how history was guided. As long as you are curious, as long as you watch and don't stop asking questions. Until we meet in the next video, take good care of yourselves.